We're currently in the outpatients area. I should say we are not getting in the way. I tend to get in the way of everybody wherever I go, but I promise we're not getting in the way. As you can see, everybody's carrying on around us, and we're making sure that we're not featuring patients that don't want to be featured. That's what the hospital are very keen about, and we're making sure that we're respecting everyone's privacy and the staff are cracking on. So don't worry. Despite Richard and I's constant needs for hot drinks, we're not slowing anyone down.
If for any reason, actually, you are coming to Whiston Hospital today as a patient, don't worry, you won't be on camera. Honestly, you'll be completely not on camera, so it's absolutely fine. Your privacy is guaranteed. Now, we've still got Dr Hilary Jones, we've got Dr Amir Khan, we've got journalist Angela Epstein, and the Mirror's Kevin Maguire with us now. What I'd like to do at this point is introduce you to somebody called Vicky Booth. Now, Vicky is a sister here in the A&E department, and she took this very brief video diary during her shift just on Saturday night, which the hospital here says was the busiest weekend they've ever experienced. So this is the kind of pressure that she was about to find herself under.
So I'm an hour into my shift. The department's really, really busy still. We've still got a lot of patients on the corridor. There's about 24 patients waiting on the corridor. We've managed to make some space in resource. So any emergencies that come through the door, we're going to be able to manage them. Still got patients on the front and the back corridors. Ambulances are arriving regularly, and we're still getting a lot of walk-in. So I've just finished my shift in A&E. It's been a very challenging night for everyone. It's very difficult at the moment, but we'll keep going. We are an amazing team here, and we love what we do.
Well, you know, they say every picture tells a story, and I thought her face told that story there, because at the beginning of that, she came on shift, she was fresh-faced, fresh as a daisy, and just look at her at the end. She was absolutely exhausted. And that's the kind of thing you think that a government minister from the health department should be coming in to look at.
Absolutely. I mean, the pressure is enormous. So you're trying to do the best for this patient and then, you know, 50 other patients during your shift. And you know that you can't. You just can't achieve what you should be able to achieve. And that's a terrible place to be. That's why so many nurses have got mental health problems right now. They're exhausted, they're in tears at the end of their shift, they're doing extra time over and above their shift, and they're dreading coming to work. And it's dreadful that they have to dread coming to work.
Are they dreading going on strike?
I think a lot of them are, but they realise that people are dying as a result of the lack of resources anyway. So the argument that people will die if they go on strike is a nonsense, a sort of blackmail argument. I know it's shocking.
It's shocking,
but believe me, it's true.
People will die anyway.
They are dying already.
It's like we are commoditising a hapless general public who have no choice but to be caught up in this perfect storm, which, by complete coincidence, several other public sector bodies and others are going on strike at the same time. So we're going into some kind of de facto general strike. It's like an unofficial lockdown. There's a massive COVID backlog. We talked at the top of this about all the different reasons which are putting pressure on hospitals anyway. Nobody ever said that going into nursing was going to be an easy ride. There are so many easier jobs to do. And therefore, this kind of idea that we can be sort of almost dismissive about the fact, well, because the system is freighted by pressure, people will die. So if we go on strike, then
so what would you
do instead? Because their argument is, as it indeed with ambulance workers, and we'll talk about the drafting in troops and the action that's happening there in a moment. What would your advice be for what they can do? Because I've listened to Dr Amir and Dr Hilary and many others for a long time, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, saying we're at breaking point, and it's broken.
Well, I think there are two separate issues here. I think you've got to obviously review the way working practice is currently deployed. I mean, there are obviously, whether it's wastage of time, of motion, of not using resources properly.
There's no wastage of time, motion, Angela.
No, not wastage. I'm talking about administrative time. The other week, I got a letter. I was due for a very routine outpatients appointment. I got a letter saying, your appointment's on X, and on the same day, in the same post, I got a letter saying your appointment's cancelled. So that's a waste, and that's only a tiny snapshot.
What is that a waste of?
It's a waste of time, it's a waste of somebody's administrative effort, and I think also, if you ask me about what should be done more broadly, I think there needs to be better arbitration. Have some kind of independent arbitrator who says, I've heard them. let's see...
Angela, let's just answer the point for those two. So I've spent a lot of time in hospital, a lot of time juggling appointments, as you both know. And it is true, you'll get sometimes a text, if that's what the system has, sometimes an email, sometimes a letter, telling you to come for an appointment, and almost either on the day or the day before it gets cancelled. Is that an administrative error, or is that pressure?
It's a bit of both. So a lot of it is pressure. We've got to remember that the NHS is one of the most efficient health services in the world.
Right.
But a lot of these things, when appointments are cancelled or postponed, it's often due to pressures, it's often due to bed occupancies, and if you are coming in for procedures, you may need a bed, but those beds are not available at the time that they thought it was. Or some staff may be off sick. It could be with stress, it could be with a physical illness. So all of those things factor into the NHS. And because there's very little room to manoeuvre...
waste of time is that? Because I think for the individual like Angela, you can think, oh, God, this is just chaos. But actually, they're trying to respond to changing circumstances, aren't they?
And I think when you get text and email, that is far more efficient and quicker than certainly doing letters. But, you know, these are administrative roles. We're not taking time away from clinical practice when these things happen.
What about the other point, which Whiston here is trying to take some very innovative ways, actually, of tackling, which is people coming in create pressure, people not able to leave creates pressure. So we know that there are big flaws in the social care and the ongoing continuing care systems. Aren't enough carers, aren't enough staff, isn't enough funding. That is blocking up the chance for people who may be well enough to go home or to another form of care to do so.
Well, social care has taken a massive hit in funding in real terms over the last few years. So you've got less daycare, you've got less home care, less district nurses. These are the people who look after people when they're able to go home. But if they can't go home because they've got no follow-up care, where do they go? They stay in hospital.
Well, they've got two very interesting initiatives here, which we will be describing to you later, which I think is fantastic, actually, when I read about this yesterday. They've basically, the hospital has organised 30 care places just down the road, so they can actually take people out of the hospital, unblock the beds, and put them in care and prepare them for getting back into the community. They've also got this frailty centre, where older people who are frail, who would normally, again, should be sent home, should be discharged, can go there and, again, free up the beds. And it's a very, very interesting...
And what they do in the frailty centre is they then re-enable them, and that's the bit that's missing, because there isn't that in the community. The other thing that they have, and I don't know if you've experienced this before, is they have virtual wards, and that's something that's amazing. So if you're leaving, you can take home a blood pressure monitor, you can be trained how to use it, or the other person that's looking after you at home can be trained how to use it. Is it just a question of money that they can do it here, or is that allocation of resources?
Go. I say virtual wards are fairly commonplace across the country, so lots of hospitals will run them. So it's
but not everywhere, though.
Not everywhere, but a lot of places.
Not where I live.
No.
So they are... that's London, and you'd think it would be available.
But they are very, very good in terms of having kind of a midpoint between hospital and home, and having that outreach care that hospital can provide.
And someone to call and talk to.
Yes.
Here, can we come back to this question of strikes? Because they're very close now, the ambulance drivers' strike and the nurses' strike, which is still very much on. I was talking to a couple of nurses, actually, over lunch. I just bumped into them. They wanted to come and have a chat 2 or 3 days ago. And here's their big worry. You have the initial strikes, and the dispute stays live. So you have to have more strikes and more strikes. So basically, as one of them put it to me, once you lift... And they both voted for strike action, very reluctantly. Once you lift the lid off that particular can of worms, you can't put it back on again. And this could be an open-ended dispute.
That's why it's best to stop the strikes before they happen and talk. I've never come across, and I've covered the world of work for more than 30 years, a group of workers more reluctant to go on strike. And you hear Pat Cullen, and she says, look, I won't dig in if he doesn't dig in, Steve Bartley, the Health Secretary. We do not want to go on strike. They're willing him to open talks, and his refusal, I think, is crazy, and it's dangerous, and it puts people's lives at risk for party political gain, because he thinks that they can turn the public against the workers and the nurses, the trade unions, and link it to the Labour Party, although the Royal College of Nursing has nothing to do with the Labour Party.
You were talking about the unfeasibility of giving pay rises linked to inflation and the kind of pay rise that the nurses are asking for, but they made very clear yesterday, through backdoor channels, that they are prepared to negotiate on this claim, that they're not going to actually hold out for what they've asked for. They will be prepared to compromise.
So why don't they mention figures? Why don't we talk about what they are prepared prepared to do, because part of the problem with certain ruinous sort of requests for pay rises is that if you compromise with one area of the public sector, then it's going to be like a contagion that goes right across the board, and it's going to influence all. I mean, like I said, there's a kind of grid effect at the moment with all these strikes. We talked about people leaving hospital and having the right sort of care packages. I saw it with my late mum, how important it is to have all that infrastructure in place. If you have an ambulance strike, they don't just stop people coming into hospital, you've got to be able to get them home as well. And it's very curious that somehow all of these strikes are happening at the same time. It's like this conspiracy.
But they would argue that it's
not
why
curious
is it curious? No, let me, you answer that.
It's the state the NHS is in. It's the pressure.
Talking about all the strikes that are going on.
You call it contagion. That's a terrible. And you're talking about the living standards of nurses and ambulance workers.
I'm talking about striking as a concept.
Save lives. And if you adopt your Oliver Twist approach, going forward, please, sir, may I have some more? You get very thin rule. I mean, look, if they do not want to go on strike, we can stop them going on strike. Let's take the action. Let's get the government talking about pay with them. It doesn't mean they have to come up with a new figure by the end of the week.
Or get somebody independent to arbitrate and then say, this is what the government say, this is what the nurses say, and we're going to abide by somebody central who is going to arbitrate on both sides.
We'll have to hold it there because we're out of time, but we will be continuing this conversation as we go through the programme and as we stay here at Whiston Hospital on Merseyside.